Well, we're live. Hi everybody, welcome to the Craig and Craig show today, because unfortunately Jane can't be with us. She had a bit of a fall, has hurt her leg a bit, so unfortunately she can't be with us today. She's okay, so don't worry, but she's just a bit bruised. So getting up the stairs here, you saw them coming on the entrance to the intro to the video. You know, we're quite high up here, so she's struggling a bit, but she'll be. I'm sure she'll be with us by next week. So you obviously send your healing thoughts. Thank you very much, all of you that are bound to do that, because I know we've got a lot of healers watching this show. So today we're going to be talking about, can we change the future? You know, can we change the future? And I'll give us a little bit of a pre-ramble about that first and seed a few ideas for you. So have a thought about that. What sort of questions would you like about that? And we'll see if we can work out what is time and have a think about the nature of reality a little bit. Hope I don't go over everyone's heads, but you know, so bring me down to earth again with your questions, and we'll see if we can address this rather kind of difficult topic actually. Can we change the future? But maybe say a few hellos first to everybody, and just say hello like we normally do, and welcome some of you. So, Spirit Animal, yeah, we saw you the other week, didn't we? Hi, Craig from Ontario, Canada, sending healing energy to Jane. She's lovely, yes, it's very nice. I'm sure all your healing thoughts will help her a great deal. Ava saying, hi, Craig, hope Jane is feeling better soon. Yeah, well, I expect she's watching this, so we can all give her a little wave. Hello, Jane, I hope you're feeling well at home. Hi, Craig and Craig show. You count on quick, don't you? Jane, hope Jane recovers soon. Yeah. Well, we've had International Women's Day, haven't we, just recently? And you know, I remember after that, I had to suffer quite a lot on that day. I was absolutely starving after we had International Women's Day. But now it's my turn to do the work. Ethel is saying, good evening, Craig. Get well soon, Jane. Thank you. And yeah, that'll do with just a few hellos, and thanks for joining us, all of you who join the show regularly. Don't forget, if you want to join the show regularly, make sure you subscribe right at the beginning. When I say, if you're coming in after the show's finished and the first time here, subscribe and you'll be able to catch us live and put your questions about any topics that you like. So we're going to start off today with talking about the main topic of the show, which is going to be, can we change the future? And have a thought. If you want to put any questions in, put either a capital Q or the word question before your question, so that Matt, when he's looking through the questions coming in, can distinguish between what's a question and what's just a comment. So, so obviously I do a lot of work, and so does Jane, with all this idea of predicting the future. So it does make you think a bit about what is time. I mean, it's an unusual thing. We take it for granted. But when you think about it, what is it? You know, already I've asked the question, what is time, a few moments ago, and that's now in the past. So we're always on this constant flow from past to future. And I'm sure it must have been very different in the early days, you know, before we had clocks, before we divided time. You know, when we started to notice the changes between the seasons and things, and we didn't have this sort of deadline mentality that we have today. And I think in the earlier days we were much more right-hand brain thinking. We didn't divide things up so much. We lived an intuitive life. We lived a life where we kind of went with the flow of nature, when things was very, very different for people, I think. And it's hard to conceive of a time now without sort of the times we have. You know, we've just gone live bang on at 7 o'clock, you know, UK time. Somewhere else it's a different time of the day, but you know, all of us have divided it up into these segments, and it makes us always think that, you know, there goes another minute in the past, here comes another minute from the future, and we kind of lose track, first and foremost, with living in the now, because all of us either live in the future thinking about what's going to come, or we might look back and think about what's been. And really, it's not a very happy situation to be in, is it? Everything, the past is gone. We can't find happiness there. The future hasn't arrived yet. We can't find happiness there. We can only find it really in the present moment. But obviously, well, I'm thinking more in terms of the main question here of, can we change the future? Because I think of it as like this, that there's two types of future, really. There's the future that I feel kind of already exists, Like I said, the future can be seen. And if the future can be seen, it raises a lot of questions. If it can be seen, can it change? So that I get the sense, or the way I've thought it through, is that perhaps there's two types of future. There's the future that's existing, that's going to come this way. Bam, the future's on its way, it's going to happen. And that's caused perhaps by things like our karma and also by actions we've already taken. But then there's also the future that might be changed, the future that we can change by our free will. Because if the future was completely set, then the whole idea of having free will or being able to change anything is completely gone out the window, isn't it? What's the point of if it's just a film running? So I think we all kind of intuitively perhaps can agree with what I've said there, possibly, that there's a future coming to us, but maybe there's some part of ourselves that we can change it. There was an interesting philosopher called, I think it was J.W. Dunn, who wrote a book, An Experiment with Time, who talked about time as being kind of on different levels too. That he talked about this idea of serialism, that we almost have layers of time following in a different in the same direction, and we can sort of jump onto another level of time and maybe see ahead because of that. But in his studies, in his thoughts, the future that he saw sometimes wasn't exactly the same as what he's seen. So there's an instance is, for example, that people were going to, a lot of people cancelled their tickets before they went on the Titanic, because they had a premonition, something was wrong, So they cancelled their ticket. So these would have been very precious. These have been the most important tickets of the time, to get a ticket to go on the Titanic. And yet they cancelled their ticket for reasons that they just felt that something was wrong. Same too, there's been stories of people that, for example, have had dreams of a baby dying, and then they've dropped it in the river. The one woman wrote a story of dropping the baby in the river accidentally and it floating off, and then she actually got to the situation where the baby was by the river, and she did the opposite. She held it back and walked away from the river. Did she change not only her life but the baby's life, from a dream? So we get these instances in life, don't we, sometimes, where there's a path that we might have taken, which might have been tragic, then another path that we took that was completely different by some decision we made, and sometimes by picking it up, often in dreams, don't we? And then there's this other kind of idea, a bit like Groundhog Day, if you've ever seen that movie. There was a philosopher called Ouspenskii who was very much friends with another guy called Gurdjieff. They had some pretty crazy ideas a lot of the time. But one of the ideas Ouspenskii said is, he seemed to think that this idea of endless recurrence. Nietzsche thought of the same concept as well, the German philosopher. But Ouspenskii said, what if we could, reincarnation doesn't happen in the future, he thought. Reincarnation happens in the past. We reincarnate back to the day we were born. And one of his ideas was that the reason we get glimpses of the future is because we've already lived the life before, a bit like déjà vu. And we're basically going back to the start each time, and we're reliving our life right the way to the end. And next time we go back, we learnt a bit more and we relive it again, and we make slightly different changes. I mean, that concept kind of falls a bit flat, I think, though, because it kind of creates a situation of what about other people? They're all going to be doing the same thing. So they're going to make different decisions. I'm going to make different decisions. And it kind of go pretty chaotic pretty quickly. It's a bit like this idea of meeting your future self, or meeting your mother before stopping the conception of yourself, So those are interesting ideas. But this is kind of like the idea of time loops. So I'm going to stimulate your thoughts here. I'm not going to give you all the answers, but what do you think about some of these things? And also later on, make some comments too. And we can make some comments now. But I'll just talk a little bit more about some of these thoughts. So what about coincidences too? This seems to be something that seems to show holes in our idea that time travels in a straight line, doesn't it? odd, weird coincidences that happen to you. You might have a thought, if any of you have had any strange coincidences, we can perhaps include some of those in the comments later on when you want to put a question in. But what about strange coincidences? Because they're very... I've had some very, very weird ones in my life. I won't go into details of them now, but certainly there's the story out there on my on this channel about Richard Parker, for example. There was a story about our family that was predicted 50 years before by Edgar Allan Poe, and it happened in real life and ended up with one of my family getting eaten. The story was lived out exactly as Edgar Allan Poe had written the story, but our family, it happened to us being shipwrecked and one of our family being eaten, and the names were exactly the same as in the Poe book. But I won't go down that line now at the moment and describe that. You can have a look at the on the site here about it on one of the other YouTubes. But it's all full of so many paradoxes, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, is there perhaps other paths we could have taken? And if we make a certain change in our life, are we going to head off on some other parallel universe somewhere perhaps, you know? Is there a multiverse, and that a choice that I make now can change my future completely? And I end up not only changing the course of my life, but being in a completely universe altogether, this kind of idea of the Matrix, you know? So I'm just seeding a few thoughts for you here. You know? What do you think about these ideas? The big difference, I think, and this is where I think we can start to think about this concept of, can we actually change the future? If we can change the future, then there is such a thing as free will. Because if there was no free will, we couldn't change anything about anything. We just, you know, we might as well give up. But free will also brings with it this idea of effort too, doesn't it? That if we make an effort, things can change. And this is where I come back to this concept of perhaps there's two types of future. One future where we make no effort and the karma just unfolds and we take the consequences of it. And another future where there is free will, where we exert effort to make a change, like we decide not to go down to the river where it's dangerous, or we decide not to buy the ticket for the Titanic, and something in us tells us to do that, and we make an effort to see the future and maybe even trust our intuition, which all of us perhaps have, to guide us to make the right decisions for the best life forward. So I think we can change the future by knowing it, by awareness. We can change the future if we pay attention to our dreams, because they can often give us all sorts of strange clues. Sometimes, like I say, they get twisted around a bit and they don't quite come out exactly as we anticipated, just like my predictions that I make on the channel. They come kind of close sometimes, but not quite as we anticipated, because all of us have a collective free will, and hopefully we will always guide the world into a better future, individually and collectively. But I think we can change the future, you know, from my experiences I've had with the Nadis, which I've talked about here. They kind of spot your future and then tell you what, if you want to make your future better, you've got to clear the negative karma that's getting in the way. So I think we can clear our future path by things like prayer, for example, if you follow that type of route in life, if that's your belief system, or mantras. Can be a way to clear the future, because they have a power to clear the future, and certain rituals and ceremonies, I believe, can clear the future. And perhaps most importantly of all, because these all tie in with astrology as well, which can also, knowledge of astrology can help us guide us through the future. But I think most important of all is doing good actions and having good thoughts, because I believe that creates a good energy in the present, and that eventually affects the future. We have a certain amount of karma that comes into our life. This is perhaps what I've been describing as the pre-existing future, the future that's determined by things we've already done in previous lives and in this life. But then we also have the ability to change this present moment by becoming a better person, by thinking better thoughts, by doing better actions, and that creates a sort of something that might create better karma, but also might just knock that arrow that's coming towards us slightly off course, and it might miss the target, the negative stuff coming into our lives. So it's all about becoming aware. It's all becoming about becoming awake, You see, machines, for example, they don't have free will. They don't have the ability to make effort because they want to do something. But we have this free will, and that's why we're not machines just living through life. We are a living being. And I also, just one last thought. The whole thing of this time that we experience is also tied up very much with psychology and our psychological understanding of time. Sometimes I've had a day today that seems a bit dragged out, you know, and it's one of those days sometimes that you seem there's more time than you need. Other days flash by like that, and moments flash by. Childhood seemed endlessly long, and as you get older sometimes and you have the days become similar, time flashes by. So I think it's also very tied up, this whole idea of our experience of time is our experience of the amount of experience within that time, as it were. You know, that we have a certain amount of experience per minute, as it were, and it makes time seem longer. So time is actually us. Time is actually our life, isn't it? We are time. Time is life. And that's why the better we live, the more time we have. The more we embrace the world, the more experience we have, the more enriched our life becomes, and the longer time becomes. And our life, instead of seeming sort of a short day of a mayfly, is something that seems long and possibly eternal. And even the knowledge perhaps that also life goes on and that time goes on. But I think the more we look into time, the more we absorb and think about these things, the more we perhaps get a glimpse into the direction that time's going. And like me and like Jane and you too, can sometimes get glimpses of the future and maybe change it. So there's my first thoughts to get us started. It's a huge subject, this. I'm sure you guys have got a few ideas, so we'll take a few questions now, if we can, and have a think about these things. Spirit animal. I think there are some things that are fated to happen, and there are other things that can be changed by free will. Yeah. I think you're probably right. I think sometimes the certain big things are coming into our life, aren't they? And it seems that whatever we would have done, it might have been very hard to avoid that thing. Certain things. For example, I think marriages, for example, are often major things in one's life. And I think with Jane and myself, for example, we felt that it was going to happen anyway. Doris Stokes predicted it would happen to us, for example. And it wasn't wishful thinking, as it were, because many of the sort of strange coincidences that seem to go with Jane and I coming together would have happened without us. It happened, we only realised them after we'd come together. You know, crikey, that's what Doris Stokes said, this, and this. So those things, I think, were meant to be. Sometimes the bad things as well come into our life and they were meant to be. And you might be right. Maybe there's certain things we can't change and some things we can. But according to the Nadi, even the big stuff can be changed. Because there was one instance I've witnessed a lot of Nadi readings as well as my own now, where I've helped people. And there was one lady, I think I mentioned this one before, who in the Nadi it said she's going to have a car accident. And she's going to get taken to hospital, and it's going to be very, very bad for her. But if you do the remedies, that won't happen. And then she's driving along in her car with her friend and saying, oh, God, I'm always worried about driving because, you know, since I had that prophecy from the Nadi, but I've done the remedies. And then, bang, there was an accident. Totally unscathed. It happened pretty much at the time the Nadi had predicted as well, and yet she stepped away from it completely unharmed. In fact, the car wasn't even damaged. But she knew, split second more, and she had probably been in hospital like her fate could have been. So there's a big thing that was changed, because in this particular case she did some quite extensive remedies to make sure that that didn't happen. So there you go, Spirit Animal. I've not answered the question completely. Perhaps raised more questions than I've answered there. But this is often the nature of these things, isn't it? Vera, do you agree that positive thoughts bring positive events in the future? Do negative thoughts bring negative things in the future? So, what are negative thoughts? Negative thoughts are usually pretty selfish things, aren't they? You think about most negative things in life, greed, jealousy, hatred, those are negative thoughts. And even kind of lack of faith in life is also a negative thought, isn't it? So perhaps they do bring the shadows to you. It certainly works with illness. The doctors will recognize even that the placebo effect happens, that a person thinks positively about their health and bingo, they suddenly get better, even though the medicine they've been given is a sugar tablet. We know that happens, and maybe that placebo effect is nothing to do with anything physical. Maybe we're drawing upon ourselves something energetic, something on our spirit, something that can create miracles. And I think positive thoughts have a higher vibration energy too. They can go out and they can reach other people. This is where healing comes in with positive thoughts. So I'm sure, I believe it does. I think positive thoughts can bring positive things. I do get a bit worried with some of these positive thinking books though, because when I look at it, if you're saying, you know, things are going to get better, things are going to get better, things are going to get better, okay, you might be, that might do, but the problem is you're assuming all the time that there's a problem in the first place. Every time you say it, there's a problem, it's going to get better, there's a problem, it's going to get better, so you're wiping it out all the time. So I think you have to kind of live optimistically, live as if everything's going to be all right in life, and just know that actually, think to yourself, it's all in God's hands. Bring it on, world, bring it on, let it happen. This is all part of life, and let it be. And I think if we can just take that attitude, it's a bit like this living in the now, you know, enjoying the moment, enjoying the process of life, and knowing that all experience is positive to you, then we live happily, and I think our lives actually do start to become a reflection of the happiness that's in us. And actually, even the most spiritual people often have suffered. But as I've said before, pain in this life it happens, but suffering is optional. Our attitude to it, the way we approach it, that's the option. So life itself and pain itself is neutral, it's just sensations, but our attitude to it is what makes the difference. Easier said than done, but that's how I think we should go with these things. Question, is there a pivot point or maybe a particular moment where we can't come back and fate takes over free will? So, is there a pivot point or maybe a particular moment? Well, the Tibetan Buddhists talk about the bardos in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And that's often interpreted as like the lokas in Hinduism, as the different layers of existence. But there is also this idea of there's a bardo as being a turning point. And that in life, we all occasionally get these opportunities. Sometimes they're opportunities that are something terrible, something really bad that might happen in our life that can really suddenly kind of wake us up to the value of life, to suddenly rethinking our life and it pulls us out of our blinkered way of seeing things and helps us all of a sudden see the big picture, you know. And so there are, I think, these turning points. They may happen by random, you might think, if you're a materialist, but perhaps they happen because there's a kind of a spiritual, we're given a spiritual kick from time to time. You know, I think one of the most dangerous things in any life is complacency and laziness. Because like I said, free will equals effort, right? But laziness can become a very dangerous thing in a person's life, in my opinion. And that's when something comes along to give you a boot. Maybe an illness, it may be a tragedy of some sort, it may be something goes wrong badly, right? And I think it's to give us a kick. Because I think one of the important things that we must, well, the important thing I think in life is that we must do our spiritual work. We must do what they call our sadhana. We must develop ourselves. We are here in this world to become awakened beings, aren't we? We're here to become enlightened beings. We're here to become conscious. The whole reason for physical existence is so that consciousness can be awakened. And we need sometimes a boot to get us back on the spiritual path. So but I've gone on from that a bit, actually, Jess. Just as well I talk too much, isn't it? Because it's just me tonight. But I think that's where you're thinking, possibly, and that's where I'd take that from. And also, I'd be very interested also, because, has any of you watching this, and put this in the questions if you get time now, it's difficult to put it in a sentence, but particularly afterwards when the show's over, if you could put it in the comments, have you ever had a weird situation of some sort that has made you change your mind, and where the future's kind of been seen and you've done something different, or you've seen a thing of the future and it's happened, or you've seen it of the future and it's almost happened, or morphed into something slightly different? I think it'd be very interesting to have a look at your comments afterwards if you want to share it in the comments below, because it becomes a little bit like a forum, this channel, if we're lucky. It's fun like that, I think. Agility Bits, hi Pat, down there in Cornwall. I wonder what time would have been like if we had invented it. Supposing we hadn't started counting the days, weeks and years that go past, we would have no idea how old we are, etc. Yeah, there's lots of interesting thoughts with that, isn't there? Earlier days, we hadn't invented time, like I was saying at the beginning, wasn't I? Time must have seemed timeless sometimes. If you look at the Aborigines, for example, in Australia, the early Aborigines that walked those lands since the Stone Age time, and hardly changed since the Stone Age time, talked about dream time. And their dream time was not like dream time about going to sleep, as far as I understand it. It was about getting into a certain time zone, almost a timelessness, where they walk across certain important holy routes across the outback and so forth, and would get in a state of complete connectivity with the world and the sacred journeys that they would take. And we don't have any of that now, and I think that might have been how archaic man would have living in a kind of a dreamlike state, not thinking about the morrow, but it's like every moment is the same, and whether you're old or young, you're in the dream time, which is almost eternal. And I think we get little glimpses of it sometimes, don't we? We get little glimpses of it sometimes ourselves. If we've on holiday, or we've taken out of our usual routines. You can be on holiday, for example, or vacation, you Americans call it, and you can be sat and you'll be thinking, oh, isn't the sky wonderful? What beautiful colour that sky. Oh, look at the clouds changing, and wasn't the sea nice? We don't look at the world. We just flash through it all the time. The most we see of anything is 1 second images flashing up on screens most of the time. So we miss things. We miss simply looking at a bit of texture on some drapery, or so we miss the amazing way the grass forms on the all of it, all the little things. We miss it. We miss all those things that connect us really with reality, because all the time we're running on that pace of time. So, any more? I feel like a machine at the circus where you put another penny in. Next one. So Frank's saying, if you can change the future, where does that leave the Nadis? Yeah, now that's interesting actually, because I thought about that quite a lot actually, because okay, so those that haven't seen this channel before, I've talked about the Nadis quite a lot. They were life-changing for me. I wrote about them in a number of my books, particularly Messages from the Universe. And I consulted the leaves in India, and they told me my future, right? And amazing, it told me I know it was my time and my future because I told it nothing, and it knew my name, it knew my date of birth, it knew my time of birth, it knew the name of my mother's name, my father's name, and all this, and lots of things about my life. And it told me what would happen and when I would die and things like that. So there was my prediction. But the Nadi also had in it remedies. And many of those remedies involved me doing all sorts of things all over India to break the negative karma, and also doing charitable acts such as giving cows away and feeding children and feeding poor people and giving clothes to holy men and all sorts of things, you know. And even sometimes I didn't for me, but I even get you paying for someone's wedding and planting trees. So he did these remedies. And I consulted lots of Nadis from different places in India. And next time you meet a Nadi, it says, it goes through the whole procedure. Another part of India, and different reader with absolutely no connection with anyone else. And there's no internet thing with this. I did the first part of this in the early days of the internet, before anybody was even on the internet. And then it would say, oh, your last reading told you would, for example, said to me, the last reading said you're going to die at 75, you know. You're now going to die at 85, you know. And it knew I'd had another reading before, and it knew I'd done these remedies without me telling anybody anything about it. And it said how my life from that point had changed slightly again. So each time it was seeing the future, and it was my destiny to do the remedies and then find a new Nadi that had different remedies to change it again. And it kind of, I think the whole thing is there. People go to it for lots of different reasons, but I think the idea of it is to awaken you. It's to push you towards finding the final Nadis, which are about the spiritual life, the jhana Nadis, which are about the enlightenment and about finding your awakening, and even the jiva Nadis, which are the Nadis of light, which there's only 10 of them in India, which give the answers on a blank leaf in light and change according, and are so fluid that your destiny is capable of changing completely. So we're in a kind of really world of the magic here, so it's very fascinating, I think. I do offer some Nadis on the website. They're the simpler ones, the easier ones for Westerners to understand. Not quite the detail, not quite the Nadis that I've spoken about here, but they will also give you remedies to help you move your life forward. So you can have a look on the website if you want that, in the corner of the screen there. So Vera, do you think the Akashic records determine the future? Well, again, this is perhaps the same sort of thing. What is the Akashic record? I think of the Akashic record as being like I see it as sort of like a mycelium, like an internet, really, a spiritual kind of internet. Because, you know, for example, when we experience the past, right, because the Akashic record is supposed to contain the whole history of the past. Now, often when we do things like psychometry, for example, when I do readings in circle, we hold an object that's been owned by someone. I can tell you the history of that person that's owned that object and the other people who have owned that object before. And if you get a really good psychometry, it can be mind-blowing, because all sorts of stuff comes out about the past. And I think when I'm doing that, and other mediums do this too, it's one of the fundamental things we teach in spiritualism, but I got very interested in it and started working with archaeologists with it as well for a while. But when we dig into it, I think, well, we're not just tuning into what's in that object. That object's a kind of a catalyst, because I think what it does is it tunes you into the Akashic record. It tunes you into the history of what has been, right? And I see that as like that's like your computer terminal where you're holding the object, and that computer terminal is taking you into the big picture of things, which is the past, which makes me think the past is there forever. You know, it's not just something that's in our memory. It exists just as much as the present exists. That the past is forever there. That everything that has happened will be there forever. And everything that has ever happened was there forever. That the future that is perhaps different. That the Akashic record, the past, is kind of determining the future in many ways. You know, it's not going to, tomorrow we're not going to all suddenly grow elephant ears. You know, it's the world is going to go on in a certain way. It's not going to flip into something surreal. It's going to continue in a certain way. And that's determined by the past, which you could call it the Akashic record, because that's the energy and the influence upon the present. But then the future is more malleable. The future, you could say, is it like the past? Is it happened already and it can never be changed? But like I say, the fact we can see it perhaps means that we can change it. And I think if there's free will, some would argue there's no free will. This is a huge argument too. Is there free will, or is it just unfolding? But from what I've understood from my work and from everything that I've done, I feel there is free will, and therefore the future is not completely set. But very interesting point, Vera. I think the Akashic records probably have a very, very strong influence on what's going to come next. Because, you know, like I say, there has to be a certain amount of structure to this. Number 3. No, we can't change the future. Free will is an illusion. Yeah, well, that's a possibility. It could be an illusion. And I think there's degrees of free will as well, actually. I don't think animals have a great deal of free will. They live by their instincts. So they're not thinking about, they're not planning for the morrow much. You know, they have a certain amount. But their life is kind of living in the present, but in a way where it's determined by behaviour. So not much free will there. In human life, I think there's degrees of free will within people too. So that some people live instinctively, you know, well, where's the next beer? Right? Okay, yeah. Well, I want to go to the pub. You know, they're living by routines, and different type of routines, of course, as well. So they're still on an instinctive level. But then a person starts to wake up a little bit, and they think about, well, actually, maybe I should plan for the future a bit, or maybe I should, you know, if I do a bad action, it might create an equal and opposite reaction and cause bad things in my life, and start to wake up and become much more in control of their world and determine their future much more by controlling their thoughts and controlling their behaviour, so that we start to send out this energy of positive thinking that we talked about at the beginning. But then I think you also then get to a point where the enlightened person who has gone beyond all this, enlightened's a bad word, but the person that's understood and become part and has had realization of their oneness with the Godhead, as it were. And I'm not thinking Father Christmas God here. I'm thinking of Godhead, which is the infinite universe, the infinite consciousness. That when we're one with that, then free will is no longer necessary. We are just the universe unfolding. So I think we go from no free will to no free will. That's how I possibly see it. But then I'm not in that level of complete, absolute understanding forever of all time of the universe. I wouldn't be here sat in this chair if that was the case. But I think perhaps in the spirit world, that's how we understand it. We become one with the infinite love, and there's no need for a past. There's no need for a future. There's no need for a present. It's all is. It's beyond past, present and future. And that is when free will is no more. Question, could we change everyone's memory of the past? Oh, that's an interesting one, Pat, isn't it? I think this has happened before. People have changed the collective false memory of the past, and therefore the past is effectively changed. Interesting. So we're very much into the world. The world nowadays, and I get very annoyed with this, wants to change history, wants to say that, you know, this didn't happen, and they're trying to change the history to fit in with the feelings of today. You know, all this woke stuff is all trying to change history and things like that. It didn't happen, you know. And we could even get to the point where, you know, we could do like they did in 1984, where they burnt all the records and history was completely changed. Nobody knew anything about any of the Shakespeare was wiped away. All the great inventions of mankind was wiped away, and Big Brother had always been there, and this is how it's always been. So we could wipe the past away couldn't we? As they are trying to do to this day, sadly, and people will wish they would read history much, much more. But I don't think it could change, because it's still set. It happened. Either a thing happened or it didn't. But I think you've got an interesting thing, but our perception of it, our understanding of it, and it would be, and let's face it, we don't know much about the history of our times, do we? We only know 2 or 3, about 5,000 years back if we're lucky, and even then we're taking guesses at it. And you think humankind has been here millions of years. I mean, what other civilizations have risen and fallen in that time, and civilizations that might not have needed to build houses and things in a time when the world, when the Sahara, for example, was wetlands, and there was as much food as you like and as much leisure time as you like, and people focused on things such as meditation and consciousness and maybe materialization. Who knows what mankind developed in those early times that came and went. We don't know the past anyway, but I don't think we actually change it. Although, as I talked about before, the Mandela effect is an interesting one, because that did seem to imply that the Monopoly man did have a monocle. We remember him having a monocle and he didn't. Did something change, or was that a slip of memory, or whatever? So it's difficult. I don't know the answer. Who could answer that? But what an interesting question. Really quite thoughtful. Thank you for that one. God, you're throwing some hard ones at me, guys. I wanted a few of your experiences too. If we can't change the future, we would not have spirit guides. That's true in terms of certainly within spiritualism, for example. One of the 7 principles is personal responsibility. Now, you can't have personal responsibility without free will. So certainly within spiritualism, from which the whole concept of spirit guides and things comes from, says that we have free will. And a lot of spiritualists, for example, I used to have big arguments with some of my very close friends in spiritualism, who said that you cannot predict the future, because the spirit world says the future is not set, it cannot be predicted. And then I say, well, what about this? And then other, there's been lots and lots of instances of people who have predicted the future, and dreams that predict the future. And I'm sure you've had experiences in your own life. So we can change the future, and the spirit guides should be there to guide us about what to do next, unless they're in the same illusion that we are in. I mean, like the idea that perhaps there is no free will, and just because a person goes into the spirit world, or even is a guide in the spirit world, doesn't necessarily mean they have all the answers, does it? The answers are still to be discovered. We might not know. I think the ultimate things go beyond time itself, where there is no past, no present, no future, and therefore no will. But then there is will and there is not will. You get to the ultimate levels of things, and it's a whole load of paradoxes, which I'm sure sometimes paradoxes are the way the universe works. Right, I used to sit in school way back in the 60s. Yeah, me too. I was about 7, and I'd cry for a baby boy I would lose in the future. It happened when I was 29. Look at that. That's an interesting one, Zena. A sad one too. But I'm sure sometimes we kind of know what's going to happen to us, don't we? I mean, I was fascinated the way Jane and I came together. I've mentioned it in other shows. Me and Jane talked about it. But Doris Stokes told me in a private reading with her that I would meet my future wife. Her name would be Jane, and I would meet her on the 6th of March. It happened. In fact, she said her name would be Jane Wallace. Jane's name at the time was James Willis, but I was doing a communication from the spirit world for her from her grandmother, who was was Ethel Wallace. So it was all there, all the components, and we were told. I was told when we would meet on the date, not the year, but the 6th of March. And which was remarkable. And Doris Stokes always said, I can't predict the future off a rice pudding. I can't tell the future. She was very much in the spiritualist ilk. But the thing she said to me, bang on for the future. And I think we know it, don't we, sometimes? We know it, Zena, don't we? We know in our hearts that something good or bad might happen in our life. But we do not need to be victims, because maybe we can sometimes, and obviously it couldn't happen in the case with yours, but sometimes I think we can perhaps alter the destiny so that we can go further. Like I had friends at school I had one friend when we were in our teens, and he said, I'm not going to live a long life, Craig. I'm not going to live a long life. And he died in his early 20s, you know. Didn't take suicide or anything. He choked to death. He drank too much, actually, and choked to death. And in his sleep. And he always said he'd have a short life, you know. He even had the lifeline on his palm was very short too, I remember, just a stump. And I wondered if that doesn't necessarily mean a person's going to have a short life. But it's interesting. I think we know. And I think sometimes I kind of feel I'm going to have a very long life. And I think that's probably quite healthy to do that, whether you do or don't, because I think it makes the body healthy. And I think often our lives get shortened with the negative thinking. And I think sometimes we can trip ourselves up. It's a bit like that placebo effect, you know. I'm going to be an old man, and I'm going to be energetic to the end of my life. The Nadi told me that, but I believe that in myself. And I think if we have that, then if we want to extend our life, we might not want to. I mean, the world goes on in the spirit world. We don't have to live here forever. I mean, you know, but I think we do even have a certain amount of control over the length of our life. Better keep an eye on the time, how long we're going. Cool, doesn't it shoot by? Morgan says, I believe strongly in karma. It's a great way to trust the powers of the future. You just need patience, wait, and revenge is sweet. Well, you're going to get some bad karma from that. Because you get, obviously, I know you're joking, but the good karma comes, doesn't it? When you, the good karma comes when you think good thoughts, have good feelings for people, and love begets love. But karma I believe in karma very, very much so, because I believe that there's different types of karma, they say. There's the karma that's already let forth in our life. The arrow's been released from the bow. This is the karma we're stuck with, you know, the karma that, you know, we can't really do anything about it. It's already manifested itself. And then there's the karma that is about to release. And we can perhaps do something about that, because we might be able to stop it manifesting in our life. And then there's the unmanifest karma, completely unmanifest, which is being developed by us now in this present moment. So the good thoughts and things we're doing here will manifest later, and they might manifest a long way down the line, maybe in another life. Or they might extend our lifetime in the spirit world before we reincarnate, or they might be just strong enough to change the effect of karma that hasn't quite manifested in our life yet. So yes, I think the future is, you know, and karma's good and bad. You know, we always think of karma as something bad, you know, but we're generating good things. So do good, be good, think good, and good will come. And this is how to guarantee that your future will be fine. Just start now, and in due course, you will eventually clear the negativity out of your life. You just have to be a decent person. And it's more fun, because you naturally become happy. And like I say, you even learn the point that even when karma does manifest in your life, the suffering is optional, because you learn. Oh, this is good. The future is a giant snooker table or pool table. Everything we do causes snooker balls to shoot in new directions, or a ripple in water can eventually disappear or create a tidal wave. Hard to control. Yeah, it's hard to control, I think. I think you're right. I don't think it's quite as simple as perhaps as I've said, that the ripple effects. But I think it is, you know, they say about karmic things that it comes back like for like. So if you do something specifically horrible, you're a torturer, for example, you may come back with very bad physical conditions yourself, or it's the things you do. Or if you're a jealous person, you may find that you become the victim of other jealous people later on down the line. Or if you're a stingy person, you might find you have riches for a while and they're snatched away. So who knows? I think it works like for like somehow, but it is a kind of a ripple effect. But it does come back. When you look at nature, though, everything is. I look at it all, and it's all mathematical, isn't it? It's all fractal. It's all connected. It's all interconnected, and nothing exists on its own. Everything is part of this oneness of connectivity. So we can't escape it. We are part of it. It is us. So the things we do are who we are. And like I said, time itself is like this. Time is what we live. Time is our life. Time is us. And that time is us in this world of duality, which eventually will become non-duality. It will become one again. We will know that the two are one. Even duality is part of non-duality. Anyway, I'm going off on funny stuff there. So there's a question. Does using a different name, like maiden name, last name or nickname, affect your vibration and future? Well, I think it does. I think it can do. I mean, my name is Craig Hamilton Parker. Hamilton was a middle name that my mother gave me because she said, one day I want this boy to be rich and famous. And Hamilton's a much more better name than the common name Parker. My mum was a bit of a snob like that. And so she put Hamilton in the middle. And then I decided to call myself Craig Hamilton for a while when I opened, because it sounded quite good. So I called myself that. And then later on I called myself Craig Hamilton Parker and kept the whole thing. And now actually the Nadis tell me to use the name, my spiritual name, which was written in the Nadis, and it says your spiritual name is Paraswaran. So I thought Paraswaran, and I thought that's an unusual name. And Indian people will know that's a very it's a name. It's a Krishna type. It's a Shiva type name, and links to the ancient knowledge of Shiva, which kind of has become very much part of my life now. And you'll notice on my books, I used the subtext Paraswaran as well, because it said to use that name because it has miraculous powers on changing your spiritual future. So yes, and I think the name you choose. Would be lovely if you could find your spiritual name, because I think perhaps we all do have a spiritual name that is our real name. That is our name that we might have had over the millennia, over the many lives. And of course they can also change your name according to numerology, because the consonants and the capital letters of your name can be added together in different ways to show your emotional nature, show your success. I mean, numerology can take a name and there's a load you can work out from it. And that can often have an effect on a person's life. And a numerologist will often say, a change of name will change your destiny. And of course, when women get married, they still generally change their surname. And that can have an effect on their life and the way they go after marriage. All for the best, I'm sure, if they marry a nice man like me. Question, is there a difference between prophecy and seeing the future and being able to use free will? Well, a lot of the Christians say that prophecy is something that's only Christians can do, only in the Bible, because that's God's word and it comes through the prophets and is therefore unchangeable and prophecy, they say, cannot be changed. It will happen as it is, where prediction, they would say, is something where sometimes it doesn't quite come out quite what you thought, but you might be close to it, right? And I think that's how they would look at that. But I think even prophecy is subject to free will. Even the highest awakened beings they're still in this world of duality, so they're still subject to flaw. All beings that are incarnate are subject to flaws. And so therefore, all these, both prophecy and prediction, are subject to free will, to greater or lesser extents. So the higher spiritual mindedness, I think, of the prophet or the seer or the predictor, the greater the likelihood of it to come true, I think. But I don't know. Again, I can only seed more questions to your questions, unfortunately, because to know that fully, one would almost have to be outside of this time and space, I think. Again, we think of time, don't we, as always being a straight line. Perhaps time is 3 dimensions, just like the world has. If we obsessively think about something that we want in the future, don't those obsessive thoughts work towards what we want, since thoughts are things? Yeah, I think they do, actually. I think we talked about karma earlier on, but this is also, karma's also, I said it's good to do good actions and good thoughts, because thoughts are even more powerful than actions, actually, in many ways. We're generating thought, we're generating, and that's not just a chemical process in the brain. The materialists would tell you that, but those of us that have looked properly at these spiritual things will know certainly that telepathy is a reality. We'd have experienced it in our life, sometimes in extraordinary accuracy. And when you see real high power mediumship, you'll realize that some telepathy is definitely going on with the spirit world, because we're getting information that is coming through thought. So thoughts, as you say, Diana, are things. And I think if we do kind of think too much about something, we can overthink, and we can manifest the very fears sometimes that we don't want to happen. If we think, oh, I'm going to get ill, I'm going to get ill, I'm going to get ill, you will, because you're bringing it, you're creating an energy with that. There's an amazing writer called David Alexander O'Neill, who was writing in, I think, the 1930s, and wrote about the early days, and before Tibet had opened up to anybody, and it was still a closed country. She went there and met the Tibetan lamas, and they were manifesting what they called tulpas. And these were like manifest energy beings. And what would happen is the tulpa, which was thought by meditation and mantra and the rest of it, it was like obsessive thought until the thing appeared, and actually manifests as a real person who would become a servant, a bit like a genie in a way. We get the stories in the genies the same. And other traditions have this idea of manifesting things. More recently, in the Philip experiments, which are worth looking up, and the table tilting and the spirit that they made up that started coming through the Ouija boards, but Ouija boards in other seances who knew nothing about it. So we can manifest perhaps a thought form, and those thought forms can perhaps become real things. So there's some thoughts there for you. Anyway, we're coming to the very end now, so I think that's the end of the questions. I'd like to thank you all for joining the show tonight, but please do put your questions in the comments. Carry on putting your questions in. Come back and have another look at the video, and if you've got anything really interesting to share, it's great, because it means people can respond and find more. It gives us a sort of a place where we can start to log these interesting ideas, a bit like a forum does. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're interested in some of the things I've said, go and have a look at my website afterwards at psychics.co.uk. You can read my books all about this, and you can get the Nadi readings and psychic readings there and so forth as well. And we'll see you next time. Okay, with Jane. Bye for now.